So, a couple of terms. The sovereignty of God. What is a brief definition of the sovereignty of God? Am I going to pick on you, Mike? Okay, yeah. The sovereignty of God is the reign of God, right? It's the fact that God is creator and sustainer of the universe. He's sitting on the throne reigning, and his sovereignty is his will that is going to be done on earth as it is in heaven, right? And so there is the active will of God, where God says, I'm going to do something, and he does it. Then there's what's called the permissive will of God, where there are times when God sits back and says, I'm going to ultimately have my will done, but there are things going on in the world that God permits, but he doesn't act on those things, okay? So there's the will of God and his sovereignty. The second word I want you to think about here is foreknowledge. Foreknowledge. People sometimes confuse foreknowledge with predestination. They're not the same thing. I believe in foreknowledge. I believe that God knows all things. I believe that God knows all things before they happen. And so I think that God sees the long view and knows the outcome of of everything that happens. Do you believe that? It's called foreknowledge. So in other words, he knows the end of this story. He knows what's going to happen to ISIS. He knows who's going to be involved. He knows when he needs to intervene. Foreknowledge. That is different from predestination, where God comes in and says, okay, everything is a pawn and there's no free will, and I'm going to move things as I will. Okay? Now, here's what you have to understand in Scripture, and this is not a class on predestination and free will. People all the time ask me, do you believe in predestination or free will? Do you know what the answer is? Yes. Yes. I believe in both. I believe in both. God predestines certain things to happen according to his foreknowledge and his will because he is reigning. But in the middle of that, there is also free will, where we all have a free will to choose how we're going to respond in that story. Correct? And so don't paint yourself into a corner and say, well, I'm Arminian and I only believe in free will, or I'm Calvinist, I only believe in predestination. If you go there, you will miss some of the beauty and complexity and mystery of God. That is very clearly both. So I think with that statement, I can pretty well alienate everyone. So, okay, let's go. Let's get started. So, having said all of that, we're talking about ISIS. We're talking about, last week we talked about our individual response to ISIS and the heart of God, and the fact that when that couple in L.A. Pulled out guns and shot 14 of their friends, some of whom had given them a baby shower in the name of ISIS, in the name of Allah, in the name of their false god. How did God respond to that? Well, he's angry. He's angry at the fact that those 14 people lost their lives and that huge injustice was done and the pain of those 14 families and everyone involved. But he's also brokenhearted. He's brokenhearted because every single person in the world is created in his image, including those two people, and he's absolutely brokenhearted that they chose that route for their lives. And they are now dead and going to spend eternity in hell apart from God, and that breaks God's heart. So, if we're representatives of Jesus Christ in the world, what is our response? We've got to be angry and brokenhearted, right? We're angry for the injustice, but we should never be glad or happy about someone who dies and goes to hell. That should break our heart. And if we can't start at a place of it breaking our heart, then we're probably never going to have the Christian response to ISIS. And I see way too many Christians that are way too excited about us blowing them off the map. And we got to have the heart of God. This has got to break our hearts. Now, should we protect our families? Absolutely. Absolutely. So as we build relationships with these people, we need to be careful. We need to be aware. Our eyes need to be open. We need to understand takia, that they are going to try to deceive us. And in one of the groups last week, a guy said, we need to love people in the name of Jesus with a gun in our back pocket. Right? Because there might come a time in which I might have to defend my family, and there's nothing wrong with defending my family. Would you agree with that? But it's got to come out of a heart of, I love God and I love these people, and it breaks my heart that they've made these choices. You know, there's a missionary in West Africa that got killed yesterday from an Al-Qaeda attack at a coffee bar. And, you know, it continues to happen. A lot of these little villages over in Iraq and Afghanistan that the terrorists are killing people, a lot of those are Christian villages. So there's a lot of people becoming Christians over in the Middle East right now. Did you know that? There's a lot of people in the Middle East becoming Christians. And the primary way they're becoming Christians is through dreams. They're getting dreams where Jesus comes in white and says, you are following the wrong God. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And they're coming to Christ. And so there's becoming these whole villages that are becoming Christians over there. And that's a lot of who the terrorists are killing. Are people that are becoming Christians. And it's prevalent enough over there that one of the questions that's being asked is, have you been visited from the man in white? Yep. And they're talking about, of course, Jesus Christ. So God is at work in the middle of all this. And what do we say? For his glory and our good. Right? And that's what we're going to talk about today. He works through everything for his glory and our good. So let's get started here. Exodus chapter 14. There's a lot of reading here. I'm going to read this whole chapter because to get what the point I'm trying to make, I'm going to have to read the whole chapter. It's 31 verses. So if you're on the video, I hope this doesn't get too long. But Exodus chapter 14, 1 through 31. This is my old NIV Bible from 1984. So it may not read exactly like yours. Even the NIV has changed since then. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi-hahiroth between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea directly opposite of Baal-Zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites did this. Now, here's an hour's worth of theology right here, okay? We can't get into all this. But there's a lot of really important phrases in that little statement right there. The first thing God says is, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. Do you believe in predestination or free will? Okay, God is sovereign, sitting on the throne, and he has foreknowledge, and he knows what he has to do to establish Israel as a nation around this place. He knows what he has to do to get Egypt off Israel's back, right? His people, they're leaving Egypt. He knows what he has to do. And he knows that part of that is he has to appeal to Pharaoh's pride. And so he says, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Okay, there's part of that. Sometimes God intervenes and does things in his predestination, knowing something's going to happen. There is still free will. Okay, but he says, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. And he will pursue them, and I will gain glory through myself. Now, here's what's interesting. This is the first time the word glory is used in Scripture. And anytime you're trying to define terms in Scripture, you have to look at where it starts and what it means. And what he says is, I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So in other words, what is glory? It is revealing the greatness of God. He said, here's what I've got to do. These Egyptian people, although they've been through 10 plagues, they're still not buying who I am. They're still not buying that I am the God, the creator and sustainer of the universe, and you are my people, and I'm going to defend you at all costs. They still don't get it. So I'm going to have to teach them one last lesson, and let me tell you what this lesson's going to do. Here it is. All his army and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. That's what the glory of God is. The glory of God is when he comes along and says, I'm going to reveal myself as so great that everybody goes, I get it, that's God. I know it, no doubt. Now, you would think after the 10 plagues they would already be there. But if there's anything we know about human nature, look at our world. We are ignorant, stupid, hard-hearted, prideful people, right? So after 10 of them, God says, I'm going to have to give them one more, and this one's going to hurt more than any of the others. You would have thought the firstborn son would have been enough. That wasn't enough. Okay, so when the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, what have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services. Now, I have to go back and talk a little bit about, if you'll read the whole story, during so many of the plagues, it would say that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. 4 times it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart. I think it was 6 times. I may have that backwards, but I think I'm right. 6 times it says Satan hardened Pharaoh's heart. So Satan and God are at work in every circumstance, right? So sometimes the hardening of people is the permissive will of God, and many times it's the work of the evil one in the middle of all that, okay? So God and Satan are both working in this. What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services. So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses, chariots, horsemen's troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near all those places I can't pronounce. So, as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone and let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. There's a 30-minute sermon right there, but that's not the point of the day, so we're moving on. Moses answered the people, do not be afraid. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians will see you today and will never see you again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Could be that we're going to see the glory of the Lord revealed sometime against terrorism in this world and ISIS in particular, and maybe our posture needs to be stillness. Our best weapon is not a gun, but prayer. Right? So let's be still. Let's wait and see what God does. Then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water, so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so they will go in after them, and I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. So, here's the word again. God says, I'm going to gain glory. My name is going to be made great. Everybody's going to know I am God. And how are they going to know? By the complete destruction and annihilation of the Egyptian army. Right? Let me say this. One of the big tripping points of unbelievers is, how can you worship a God who is so violent and annihilates people in the Old Testament? Right? You ever heard that? We're going to answer that question today, by the way. Okay, so let's move on 21. I'm skipping a couple of verses there. When Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. Think about it. One of the miraculous things the Lord did was not just pull back the water, but make the ground dry, right? Then the Egyptians pursued them, and all of Pharaoh's horses and chariots followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud as the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. He made the wheels of their chariots come off, so they had difficulty driving. And the Egyptians said, let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. So they get down on the bottom of this thing, and all of a sudden, the wheels start falling off the chariots, and the dry ground becomes a little muddy, and they get stuck. And they're like, oh, we've played this game before and lost, didn't we? So now they're ready to try to get back out and run away from the Egyptians. And the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen. So Moses did that. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and the horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. So this is one of those, how can God of the Old Testament be this way? But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the great power the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, listen to this, verse 31, this is the key. When the Israelites saw the great power the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in God. So the question comes, why does God do things like this in the Old Testament? And the answer is, one of them is, he must protect his name. He must protect his name. He gives glory to himself and protects his name when people come against him, and he has to stand up and say, I've got to show you that I am the God of the universe and that I am the one true God. So the question we're about to ask is, how does that apply to today in ISIS? And here's my final word on the subject. I don't know when, I don't know how, I don't know what it'll look like. It will be a lot longer than I feel comfortable with. But I'm telling you, do you really think God is going to sit back and let Allah gain glory? There's not a chance in the world. It's going to go on for a period of time, and then God is going to come, and he's going to do something that is going to cripple ISIS, destroy ISIS, do something to reveal to the world that Allah is nothing but an idol, he's a false God, and that there is one true God, Jehovah God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Christian God, who has all power and all authority. There will come a day he will get glory through the way he handles ISIS, and the world will go, wow, did you just see what God did? And he usually does it in such a way that we can't really doubt who did it. Now, I don't know what that's going to look like, but I believe that with all my heart. Okay, so let's stop. We've got a question here. We're going to go around the groups and talk for a minute. The question is, how does God protect his name in today's world? In other words, here's this really, it's a doctrine that God always protects his name. So what are some ways that God protects his name in today's world, and what might that look like moving forward? Let's just talk here for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, and then I'm going to show you another story out of Scripture about God protecting not only his name, but his people. I want to tell you a story, but it's in short form, okay? It's in short form because we don't have the time to run through it, but I want you to do a study sometime, a group of people called the Amalekites. I'm going to show you the Amalekites, and then I'm going to give you the reason that I think that the God of the Old Testament had to sometimes annihilate whole groups of people, men, women, and children. Okay? If you'll notice, number 2 is God must protect his people. And when I'm talking about his people, I'm talking about the Jewish people in the Old Testament. Why did he have to protect the Jewish people? His name was on them, and they were the lineage for his son, Jesus Christ. If the Jews get wiped out, what happens to our salvation? Yeah. So you think that was pretty important for God to say, you know what, I'm going to do what it takes to protect my people? Yeah. Now, who's his people today? Church, right? You think he's going to protect us? Absolutely. Now, does that mean there'll never be anyone die for their faith? No, absolutely not. You know, during the Roman Empire, the whole book of Revelation was written to deal with the fact that the Roman Empire was killing so many Christians. There were Christians dying for their faith, and the book of Revelation is the book that says what? God's going to come and deal with this. Okay, you don't have to worry about it. And during that time period, they were killing Christians, and you would look at it and you would go, the mighty Roman Empire, the most powerful nation that has ever been on this earth, and here are these Christians, and the emperor is putting them up on sticks and lighting them on fire. What is going to happen to Christianity? Well, fast forward, what happened to Christianity? God took out the Roman Empire. And there's 1.5 billion Christians in the world today? So I think God won. Right? God protects his people. God protects his people. So God will come and protect his people from ISIS. He'll protect his people from Allah. He'll protect his people from terrorism. He protected his people from the Amalekites. He protected his people from the Roman Empire. There will never be a government that is able to eradicate Christianity. Long after every government is gone, what will still stand? Jesus and his people and the Word of God. Okay? So we're the most protected people in the world because the Creator of the universe is personally in charge of protecting us. Does that mean I'll never die for my faith? No. But it means the church will never be wiped out. Okay? And you know what? If I have to be one of the ones that dies for that to happen, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. I hope you're okay with that. I hope you're ready that if somebody puts a gun in your face and says, are you a believer? You say, absolutely. Right? I got to tell you, I can't go there. Okay. Let's start with Exodus chapter 17, verse 8. Okay, so we were just in Exodus 14. This is 3 chapters later. So imagine the Israelite people. They don't have any arms. They don't have any swords. They don't have any way to defend themselves. They've been slaves in Egypt for 400 years. All they came out with was supplies. Okay, and they're wandering around, and scholars tell us there's about 2 million of them wandering around the desert. Well, don't you think that's easy pickings? 2 million Jews unarmed wandering around the desert. And there was this group of people called the Amalekites. And so right after they cross the Red Sea, before almost anything else happens, here comes the Amalekites, a bunch of terrorists who are coming to take out the Jewish people and get their plunder. So the Amalekites came, verse 8, and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands. So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. Now, if you'll remember, this is the story where as long as Moses' hands were raised, the Israelites won, and if his hands started going down, the Amalekites would win. Okay, so Hur and Joshua held up his arms. Not Joshua, who? Caleb held up his arms, and they ended up winning, and the Amalekites fled. Okay. That didn't set real well with God because it was a direct attack upon his people and a threat to his plan. Okay? Now, listen to what Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 14 says. For the Lord your God moves about in your camp to protect you and to deliver your enemies to you. Your camp must be holy so that he will not see among you anything indecent and turn away from you. Well, here's another hour we could talk. Listen to what God says. My purpose, I'm around your camp. Is God around our camp today? Is he wandering around our homes? Is he wandering around our churches? Absolutely. He says, what am I here for? I'm here to protect you. I do 2 things. Here's what you have to know about God. He does what's good for his name and to protect his people. I always say, this is kind of the Embark way, God is in everything for his glory and my good. You believe that? His glory and my good. He's here to give greatness to his name and to protect his people. There's a little caveat there in that verse. Did you notice? But your camp must be holy so that he will not see among you anything indecent and turn away from you. So there's times when God may say to his people, you know what, people? I'm still going to give glory to my name, and I'm still going to do what's best for you, but sometimes what's best for you is to kind of take you to your knees so you remember that I'm God. Because sometimes even his people would turn away from him. Did the Israelites ever turn away from God? And what did God have to do sometimes? Let the enemy come into the camp and take them so they would remember, oh yeah, God is our God, and then God would always come back and protect his people, right? So there's this overarching principle. God will always protect his people. But there's this caveat in here saying, but we need to be holy, or he can lift his hand of protection from us as a country, United States, as a church, and as individuals. God will lift his hand of protection and say, okay, because of your lifestyle, because of the way you're acting, because of the way you're living, I'm going to back off here so that you'll learn what you need to learn. Right? Now, let's get back to the Amalekites, and then I'm going to make my point, and then we're going to talk some more. The Amalekites, God did not appreciate the fact that when his people were young, coming right out of the wilderness and unarmed, those Amalekites fought. They attacked them. And so God, in 1 Samuel chapter 15, God tells Saul, I want you to get rid of the Amalekites. I want you to kill every man, woman, and child. I want you to kill their horses, their donkeys, I want you to wipe them out. Did Saul do that? No. And they remained a problem in his side, in the side of Israel forever. And in fact, their descendants are living right over there around Israel, and they're still a thorn in their side. When Saul was killed, and if you'll remember, a man brought Saul's crown to David, that man was an Amalekite. And David killed him. When Haman, who was trying to kill the Jewish people, Mordecai and Esther and all that story of Esther, Haman was an Amalekite. God knew in his foreknowledge that the Amalekites were always going to be a thorn in the flesh of his people, and he wanted to protect his people, and he gave his people the chance to protect themselves, gave the Amalekites into their hands, and because of Saul's disobedience, they were a thorn in their flesh forever. Here's what I want you to notice in what's said here on number 2. In fact, I'm going to read it so we get it. So why all the violence that is commanded by God? This is the top of the 3rd page. To protect his people. God knows the hearts of all people, and he knows what certain people groups will do if they are not stopped. When a people group threatens God's will for his people or the order of his creation, he will step in and protect his creation, his people, by destroying the threat. We don't know when or how God does that, but that is what he does. What you see in the Old Testament, why would God destroy a whole group of people? Because God, in his foreknowledge, knows that group of people. God has set up his creation, and there's an order to his creation. And God's the protector of his creation. And there's certain people that are so evil that they literally threaten the order of his creation, and he must go and wipe them out to protect his creation. Noah. Right? The Egyptians. He didn't wipe them out, but he wiped out that army. The Amalekites. There were a few different times where God says, if I don't wipe these people out, they're going to either A, become a threat to the way I've set things up, or B, a threat to my people through whom I'm doing my will, and so I have to wipe them out. Why everyone? Because what ISIS is doing today and what terrorists are doing today is no different from what they've been doing since the beginning of time. They train the kids from the time they are young to hate. They train the women to do the dirty work for them. What happened to Samson? Right? There wasn't a man in the world that could take Samson on, but a woman could. Right? So why does God have to destroy them all? Because God knows that 4-year-old is going to grow up to be the next terrorist. And one of the great mistakes that people in the West misunderstand is the way that the Easterners think. And their best weapons against the West are women and children because they know that we won't kill them. We have to sometimes, don't we? Why would God kill a child? Because that child is the next terrorist that's going to try to take out Israel, the church, whatever it is. So there are times where God has to protect his people and protect his creation. And it's interesting to me that people in our culture go, why would a God do that? I'll tell you exactly why God would do that, to protect you. He did it to protect you and your way of life. And so your very complaint, you can afford to complain because God protected you. Isn't that interesting? Now, is God going to protect the church today? Absolutely. And when he comes, will it be a complete annihilation? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know anything about how it's going to happen. I just know my God well enough to know that he's going to come and protect his people and protect his name. And do I need to know any more than that? No. So last week we talked about the individual response. What's the national response? We're going to be still. Remember Exodus 14? We're going to be still, and we're going to watch God protect us. Now, that doesn't mean passive. That doesn't mean that. Don't take that to mean anything other than I'm going to trust in the Lord, and I know God's going to come and deliver us. Now, that may be in the form of a revolution where there's an army with guns and missiles and all sorts of things, and that doesn't surprise me at all. But here's, as comfortable as I am with God taking them out, I feel that uncomfortable that he's calling me to pull out a gun and shoot somebody. Now, there may be a civil war in America, and it may come to that. Don't know. But I know it's not there now, and I know this, I'm not going to be happy when it happens. I'm not going to be joyful when a bunch of people die. It's going to break my heart just like it breaks God's heart. Okay, so third, and then we're going to wrap this thing up. God uses governments to exact his justice. Turn over to Romans chapter 13, and I just want you to understand this, and then we're going to call it a day and let you guys discuss around the table. Romans 13, 1 through 7. We don't know how God's going to do it, but I think God's going to use governments to do it. Everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and he will commend you. For he is God's servant to do you good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword for nothing. He is God's servant, the agent of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also because of your conscience. And then we're going to stop there because the next verse says I have to pay my taxes to the IRS, so we're going to stop short. Of course, he's talking about the government and the personal response to the government in the Roman Empire, right? Now remember, what's the Roman government doing? Not at this point, but within a few years, they're killing Christians. But right here, they're punishing Christians. They're throwing them in prison, right? Paul's in prison. And yet he's saying submit to government officials because God uses governments to exact his punishment on people. Here's what I want you to notice. God doesn't equip individuals to exact his punishment. God doesn't believe in vigilante justice. He appoints governments, sometimes evil, wicked governments. Habakkuk is an entire book written by a prophet saying, God, why are you using pagan governments to bring judgment on your people? And the answer is real simple, because I'm God and I can use who I want to do what I want. If you ever create something, then you can be in charge of it, but I'm creator and I get to do what I want. That's kind of the crass understanding of Habakkuk. He's saying, listen, God is over all authorities. He's over all governments. When God gets tired of it, he's ready to exact his vengeance. Who's he going to use? He's going to use governments. Here's what is the irony of all ironies to me, and we're not going to get into politics, so don't even comment on this comment. But I think it's so interesting to me that our president has handed the Middle East off to the president of Russia. I find that to be so fascinating. And wouldn't it be ironic if God ends up using Russia as the government to address ISIS and terrorism around the world? But nothing would surprise me. God's always used different people at different times. So, is this the end of the world? I have no idea. But if it is, God will use Israel, because that's who he uses at the end, right? Little bitty tiny Israel, everybody's going to come against them, and Jesus and God and probably a few of their nuclear warheads are going to take care of all that, right? But we don't have to worry about it, right? Because God's going to use governments, and he's going to do it in his way, but it's all for who? The protection of the church. It's all for the protection of the church. And the worst thing they can do for me is die. They can kill me. And when they kill me, I get to go spend eternity with Jesus. So I have a win-win in front of me. Right? So, a couple more questions here. What is your response to the fact that God will protect his people and his reputation? Why do we struggle with turning injustice over to the hand of God? Because see, here's really the Christian problem with regard to terrorism and ISIS, is we want God to say to us, you're in charge of handling and making this wrong right. We want to take justice in our own hands. We want to be the one that pushes the button. Because there's something about our human nature, we just like to take vengeance. And God says, no, that's mine. And so I want you to talk a little bit about why we have a struggle as men letting go of that. So talk around your tables. This is it for the presentation. If you're on video, there'll be questions up here. Discuss this, and then the day is yours. Hope you guys have a great day.